On the dot, so we will. On point 21, European Maritime Fisheries Fund. Chris Davis is first on the speakers list. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief. Just 2 points, really. The first is just to say that I very much agree with the direction in which our rapporteur is going. Very sympathetic to what he has to say. I think his Amendment 50, I think his Amendment 50 creates an interesting debate where he is deleting a whole article on the Commission's proposal for aid to be paid for the storage of fish under the obligation the proposed obligation to land all catches. Now, I think this is interesting because, of course, the argument he's putting forward for this is that, frankly, the object is not to land all catches. The object is to reduce bycatch and prevent us catching the wrong sort of fish in the first place. So why are we paying out this money, which can create perverse incentives? I think politically, we need this tool in order to be able to help sell the discard ban, the obligation to land all catches. It's the offer of being able to buy off opposition with some money, really. But I think where the direction he's going is absolutely right. But maybe you need the political oil. The only other point I'd make really is just the comparison between the attitude likely to be taken in this committee and the attitude likely to be taken in the Fisheries Committee. All committees like spending money, and the Fisheries Committee will be no different, if we can only find the source. The rapporteur in the Fisheries Committee, Alain Cadec, I know in his working document has proposed that we should not be cutting the subsidies for the scrapping and modernisation of vessels. We should continue with that. He's proposed that we should have money available for fuel subsidies when fuel prices reach exceptional levels. And he's proposed that money should also be made available for general port improvements, particularly, I think, for larger vessels. I think in all these three things fly fundamentally in the face of the arguments most likely to be heard in this committee. But his is the committee that counts, and he's the rapporteur. That's all.
Chris, thank you very much. A clear message, and I think a really wise message. Next speaker on my list is Linda McEvan. Linda McEvan will replace today Kriton Arsenis, who is the shadow rapporteur from the S&D. Please, Linda.
And who's also a substitute on the Fisheries Committee. So we rely on Kriton to take the message to the Fisheries Committee. And of course, we all vote at plenary. So we shouldn't assume. And the Fisheries Committee, like our committee, is mixed and they have mixed views. And so I'm still hopeful about the Fisheries Committee on this issue as well. I agree with what was said this morning by our rapporteur and by Chris just now, that we can't spend public money to have business as usual anymore. We have to stop spending money on overfishing. If we do spend money on boats, it should only be to help them get selective gear to stop overfishing. We should make sure everything is linked to sustainability of our seas. And any funding should be made conditional to adequate fleet capacity reductions. So if we need to reduce capacity, we should make the funding dependent on that. I'm looking at Kriton, left me some notes. Yes, the other issue is about fisheries reserves. One of the issues which we agreed in our committee was the whole issue of setting up no-catch, no-take areas, fisheries reserves, and we supported that in this committee. And it might be good to think about using the fund to help set up these kind of fisheries reserves. So, yes, we should have a consistent policy. The funding should be consistent with the goals of sustainability and reversing the decline of our fishing stocks.
Thank you very much, Linda. There are no other colleagues or shadow rapporteurs available. Now I want to give the floor to the Commission. Please, the Commission.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm most grateful to the the Commission is most grateful to the rapporteur for a very coherent and thought-through rapport with very coherent amendments. We note with particular interest that there is no suggestion at any stage that subsidies for scrapping or temporary cessation of fishing should be reintroduced, and that's certainly a worth noting point. We also note, if I go through the whole report, that the rapporteur suggests removing a certain number of type of fundings, and I would just like to point out some of the technicalities of these proposals. First of all, removing any aid to the storage of fish. There is one point about fishing, is that it is very often seasonal. Now, if you catch in a seasonal fishery, if you catch a lot of fish, you have two solutions. One is to discard it, because there's no market for it. You may say, well, don't catch it first. But this is the only fishery that the particular fleet can get involved in. The other option is to store this particular catch, to process it over the course of the year. So you deep freeze tuna fish, for example, in the albacore tuna fishery in the Gulf of Biscay during the month of the summer, and then you process it over the course of the year. This means that you do not overinvest in processing capacity and that you have stored enough raw material to get your factory to work for the whole year. So there is a certain logic in having this subsidized for a certain time. That is what happened in the past. Now, doing this over the long term is, of course, actually transferring to the public fund an obligation which really belongs to the private sector. But moving from one to the other is something which needs a little bit of time. That's why the Commission proposed a phasing out period. Okay, so we didn't say wipe it out right now. We said, well, it has to be wiped out by 2019 with a certain number of conditions and decreasing rates of support, so that the fleet involved in this fishery, the processing sector involved in this fishery, or other similar fishery, which, by the way, are extremely selective, are implemented progressively without, access type of solution. The other problem that we see about also certain logic about removing certain type of aid is the direct removal of support for managing transferable fishing concessions. It is true that transferable fishing concessions may become optional, but it doesn't mean that because it is optional it cannot be supported. As a contrarior example is support to the producer organizations. It is not mandatory to be involved in the producer organization. It's not mandatory to set one. It is optional, but the Commission has proposed that this support to producer organization should keep on going. And therefore, I think removing completely any possibility to give any support to transferable concession, fishing rights concessions, just because it is not mandatory may be a bit extreme. So, last point, removal of any support to the contribution to develop new market. May I recall that there are a number of countries where the consumption of certain fish product is not customary, when in other countries the same fish is widely accepted. So in certain conditions, it is really helpful to encourage local consumers to learn about the perfect edibility of certain type of fish and to learn about the recipes which allow them to process or to adapt this to their local cuisine and to improve their consumption of this particular species. And that also goes with the objective of reducing discards. If you create a market for something which is perfectly edible and which is perfectly well consumed in certain member states, simply because it's not well understood in another member states, well, we shouldn't get rid of this particular option. Still, there are certain conditions, of course, which the Commission perfectly agrees with the rapporteur that should be respected. So let me turn out now to a number of the amendments, specific amendments proposed by the rapporteur. We have one particular problem, which is with amendment number 4. The rapporteur has proposed to introduce again what used to be in the EFF, which was the objective that no modernization of fishing vessels should increase the ability of a vessel to catch fish. First of all, let me point out that there's a certain incoherence with this particular amendment and other amendments, in particular Amendment number 19, which only refers to capacity of the fishing vessel. Second, let me recall that we have had extremely serious difficulties in assessing the ability of a vessel to catch fish. It's basically the effectiveness of a fishing vessel. This may vary according to a number of parameters, some of which are not linked to the vessel in itself, but which may be linked to the capacity or to the experience of the fishing skipper, or to the way the crew may resist storms because they are on a more comfortable vessel, etc. And we've been confronted with such technical difficulties which are really very difficult to assess, that we have preferred to back out from this particular option. But once again, the point is that if this is an amendment that is being kept, then all the other amendments referring to either ability to catch fish or capacity have to be coherent with this particular amendment. And once again, Amendment 19 refers to capacity. Amendment 5 also refers to capacity. As for the proposal regarding the redistribution of funds, that I don't have to say anything about it. Regarding the amendments on fishing, on the balance between fishing capacity and the productive potential of the fisheries resources, this is clearly one of the main objectives of the EMFF, so this is perfectly coherent, and the Commission has no problem with this, no matter what. Regarding the impact on the environment of aquaculture, we do not have any problem with this recommendation and the various amendments proposed. It may be, in technical terms, preferable to have one recommendation which would apply to a number of articles rather than repeating the same amendment, or repeating the same condition in a number of articles. But these are technicalities that do not need to be discussed here. Regarding multi-annual plans, there are a number of recommendations, some of which, frankly, can be dealt with in a easier fashion. In particular, Amendment 22, which makes a new reference to Articles 17 and 21 of the Basic Common Fisheries Policy, and basically these are repetitious, and there's, in legal term, they're not absolutely necessary. As far as some other amendments, like Amendment number 24, where we are referring to where the rapporteur proposes to reduce and, where possible, eliminate. Well, as soon as you have fishery, you are going to have a biological impact on the ecosystem, no matter what. So the only way to eliminate is to suppress. And even then, I'm not even sure that it will completely suppress any impact on the basis of what has occurred before. I would also like to mention Amendment 30. Here we have a technical difficulty, sorry. The rapporteur suggests that any replacement or modernization of the engines should not serve to increase their power. That's obvious. But any other change on board the vessel which may not increase the power of the engine may have a similar effect. Let me take an example. If you put around a propeller a nozzle, that is basically a pipe, this will increase the efficiency of the propeller. It will not change the power of the engine, but it is clear that the vessel will be more performant. Now, it will also reduce cost and oil consumption, etc., but it will certainly make a trawler more efficient. So here again we are confronted with this difficulty that on one hand we don't want to increase the power and therefore the capacity, because capacity measures both the power of the engine and the volumetric capacity of the vessel. But we have also the efficiency of the vessel, which depends on a number of other factors. And let's not be scared about it. The main factors nowadays of the efficiency of the fishing vessel is electronics. I mean, you have extremely sophisticated programs now which allow the skipper of a vessel basically to have a type of Star Wars operation of the gear, especially trawling gear. So there are technicalities, technical problem in certain of these amendments which are difficult to solve in a few just in a few minutes, just discussing like this. I have also an observation regarding the suggestion by the rapporteur saying that at one stage, I don't remember exactly the number. Yeah, it's in the amendment number 17. The rapporteur suggests that we should consider the possibility to conduct joint research project with data collection funding. Here, I would point out that first, research means a long-term goal. It means also an obligation of means, not an obligation of results. You may get involved in long-term activities to find out what would be eventually, possibly, the solution to a particular situation. And this is really the type of activity which is undertaken under the RTD, Research and Technological Development. So if you start investing in this type of activities with the data collection for scientific advice for the management of fisheries, then you're opening up in a new range of activity, which has been undertaken for years. We know all about these extremely worthy work on developing biological model, bioeconomic model, etc., etc. But if we start to use data collection for scientific advice to develop tools for the long term, we are getting away and quite far in diverting limited funds which are really for the purpose of fisheries management and protection of the resources and the marine environment. So, President and Rapporteur, thank you again for a very comprehensive and coherent report. Some of the technicalities may need some, drafting improvement, but the major point for us is that we see very clearly that this committee is not encouraging in any way the reintroduction of scrapping aid, that is permanent cessation of fishing activity, nor the temporary cessation activity, nor subsidies to using more energy or...
Vielen Dank und sag mal, was wir an unserem Bericht...
Thank you very much. I think what we still need to approve in our report is our business. Thank you. I think those comments are important, but we will take our own decisions here in discussion with each other and with the shadow rapporteurs. We decide what priority is most important where. That's, after all, the decision of the MEPs. By way of conclusion, I'd like to give the floor to the rapporteur.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ κύριε Πρόεδρε και ευχαριστώ και όλους τους σκιώδεις ηγητές και την Κομισιόν. Well, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank all the shadows and the Commission for their very tangible proposals with regard to my report. I think we need to find the political and financial instruments that will enable us to strengthen sustainable forms of fishing as well as artisanal, small-scale, local fishing. I think that all our strategies need to be based around these elements. I'm convinced that fishermen are aware of the problems that exist because those who have been struck by the crisis, well, it's fishermen that have been severely struck by the crisis because they haven't been able to do their jobs as they would wish to. One of the solutions would be for us to manage fisheries better. I mean, for example, what we do through Natura 2000 on land should be done on sea as well. Local communities and fishermen need to be supported, and then fish stocks will be able to recover. I mean, this is something that I've been looking at for a long time now. But it's not really my point of view. It's something that fishing communities are more and more accepting of now. This is something that emerges from their own experiences. I mean, had we suggested something along these lines a few years ago, they would have been against. But it's now fishermen themselves who propose these kinds of things. We've heard several very interesting comments. We'll be discussing all of this in committee and with the shadows. I think we have a shared objective. We need to support sustainable fishing. I don't think we should be repeating the errors of the past. One of the mistakes we made in the past is that we scrapped traditional style vessels. I mean, they were the culmination of an entire shipbuilding naval tradition, and they were scrapped. Unfortunately, that was done, and unfortunately fishing activities suffered as a result. So I think it would be wise to say that we need to improve our text. I mean, local communities feed themselves with fish, but it's not necessarily all about simply giving local communities more money so they can eat more fish. I mean, I don't necessarily think we should be funding the processing of fish either. I mean, when a fund wants to implement new fishing activities, it always, processing activities are always brought up. I mean, we're not necessarily against that, but we think that we need to fund small and medium-sized producers. I mean, we have to bear in mind that several different funding instruments need to be used to ensure that the sector remains sustainable. We need to focus on research, because if we want to establish a fishing strategy in some regions, well, we need to ensure that research is looked at. I mean, let me tell you about my own country. We have experiences of fishermen, and we also have academic research that's been carried out on each region and each fishery. If we want to properly manage water resources as well, I mean, when we wanted to do that, we went and we asked for local level hydrological studies to be carried out, because we wanted to see whether the operations that we would be implementing were going to be beneficial. And I think we have to do the same thing for fisheries, and also for marine biodiversity while we're at it. I mean, we need to see what the exact situation is for each fishery so that we can see how funds are allocated. There are other sources. There are other damaging activities that we haven't discussed today. Over construction, for example, that has an effect on marine biodiversity as well. So we need to really know what's going on in individual fisheries, and researchers in the academic world can really help us to be more effective in that.
Thank you very much. The deadline is the 27th of June, 12 o'clock. 17th and 19th of September, that's committee week. It will be voted in the committee, and probably the 28th of November in the Fisheries Committee. Thank you. That brings us to the next point on the agenda. That's 17. That's the development of the European transport network. Give the floor to our rapporteur.
Prezenta propunere de regulament va abroga și va înlocui decizia 660.
Well, the current regulation is going to substitute the decision, the 2010 decision of the European Parliament on the guidelines for developing the trans-European transport network. This is the first discussion we'll be holding on this in a meeting. So let me tell you a few words about it. We currently have very fragmented infrastructure, both geographically speaking and also in terms of the means of transport. Now, the objective is to establish a transport network that covers all regions and will help us develop all transport modalities. I mean, these guidelines are aiming to establish a long-term strategy until 2030 for the central network and up to 2050 for the comprehensive network. The Commission decided that the best approach would be to have a dual approach, i.e. to have a core network and a comprehensive network outside it. It's also important to have certain transport corridors in place to ensure the free circulation of goods and individuals and to achieve the territorial cohesion that we hear so much about. It seems obvious that we need to take an overall comprehensive approach. We need to eliminate the missing links and bottlenecks that we have. That all needs to be dealt with. Now, I, in general, agree with the Commission's proposal, this core network, comprehensive network idea. And my opinion has, in general, followed the Commission's line. The Commission's line bases itself on prioritising projects based on a certain number of criteria. And the idea is to overcome certain problems. For example, missing links, particularly with regard to border connections, which is an obstacle for the free circulation of goods and persons within the European Union, and also for the free, but is a barrier to circulation between member states and third countries. And there is also a problem when it comes to missing infrastructure. And we can see this within member states and also at the European Union level as a whole. And all of this does create bottlenecks. In particular, I'm thinking about east-west links. I think many improvements need to be made here. A lot of infrastructure needs to be built, and existing infrastructure also needs to be improved. Another problem is that intermodal infrastructure is very fragmented. Many means of transport, for many means of transport, it's very difficult to shift to another mode of transport from that mode of transport, and that means that there are bottlenecks created there as well.